Welcome back. The last time we were together, we talked about the evolution of capitalism as an economic system and how it replaced some old primitive economic systems that we've had for most of human history, like feudal aristocracy and mercantilism. And what was unique about capitalism was this idea that wealth wasn't fixed, it wasn't backed by gold. Wealth came from exchange, it came from specialization and the division of labor, and it came from what Adam Smith called the invisible hand. Markets, as we saw them applied in Europe and later in the United States, since 1800, gave the world an unprecedented amount of economic growth and prosperity. So today I want to take a look at what other economic systems exist. What came after capitalism and what was the economic, social, and historical response to markets being used to a wide scale? And the answer to that comes in the Industrial Revolution and the social changes that come out of the Industrial Revolution. So a couple things that industry really, a couple of the ways that industry really changed the world landscape, especially in the United States, was the growth of cities, urbanization. We had population explosions. We had a shift from agriculture to industry. And what we saw was an explosion of new wealth. It was actually a brand new phenomenon. There was no wealth inequality before the Industrial Revolution because we really didn't have wealth before the Industrial Revolution. So wealth inequality as a problem is actually new in the United States around the middle of the 19th century. And while it's new, it becomes concerning because there's many reformers during this time who think that this disparity between the rich and the poor is a problem. Now, you have to understand that during this time, everyone is getting richer. The problem is not that the poor aren't getting richer. The concern is that they're not getting rich as fast or as they're not getting as well off as those at the top. And so reformers come in and say that, the reason why people get wealthy is because they can accumulate certain capital and private property. And they see that private property is tied directly with this capital accumulation. And they say that capitalism and private property at the foundation of it is what really causes this gross inequality. So they try to design a system to be more just, to kind of bridge this gap that serves everybody, not just those at the top. This is the concern of the reformers. These reformers brand themselves socialists, and socialism as an economic ideology or system, notice that the definition is similar, but what we do here is we replace the idea of how the means of production are owned. In capitalism, the means of production, right, the land, labor, and capital, which is used to actually make the stuff that we all want, is owned privately by individuals. And with that comes the right to exclude others from them. Well, socialism says we should turn that on its end, and that these resources, land, labor, capital, should be owned collectively, and it should be operated through the government. Now, socialism requires not a market economy, but a command economy, where the signals don't come from consumers buying and selling, but it comes from the government. And the government commands from the center by answering those questions that we said all economic systems seek to answer. And that is, what kinds of things are we going to have? How are these things going to be produced? And finally, who is going to get these produced, finished resources? So let's take a look at what it means to have a command economy based on central planning. So I want you to imagine a command economy referring to the state. It's the state that is giving the commands. And I want you to think of central planning as the process through which these commands are realized. When this happens, government officials issue decrees. They find some decision that needs to be made. They find some product that needs to be made or some resource that needs to be extracted. And they send this resource over to the planners or the planning board. And it's up to these planners to design the economy the way an architect would design a building to put this plan into practice. So if we take a look at the planners here, it's important to know that planners make all kinds of decisions, and they have to make decisions about which resources we're going to use. So if pencils is the product that the central planner or that the government says we need to make, the central planner's goal is to make this happen. So they have to coordinate what we're going to use to make this pencil. They have to coordinate the production of all of the individual materials that go into making a pencil. They have to, for instance, figure out where we're going to extract the coal, right, in order to make part of the pencil. We have to figure out how we're going to get the brass and how we're going to extract and extrude and produce the brass. We have to figure out where we're going to get the lumber. We have to figure out how we're going to get the glue and the resin that binds the pencil together. We have to figure out how we're going to get the graphite for the pencil lead. And we finally have to figure out how we're going to get the inks and dyes that make these pencils aesthetically attractive. Government, though, also is going to decide who works in these factories. So they don't only dictate the use of physical resources, natural resources. You're included in natural resources. They direct and plan how human capital is used as well. So they decide who works in each of these factories. So who's going to work in the rubber factory? Who's going to work in the brass factory? Who's going to be a lumberjack? Who's going to be a glue or resin manufacturer? Who's going to work in the coal mines? And finally, who's going to be the person who paints? Okay, so it's important to note the government makes decisions far beyond just which resources are going to go into the production of what. They also decide who aids in that production and whose labor is going to go to which specific tasks. That's the essence of planning. So the next question is, what does it take for central planning to work? And I'm going to take this to be a separate question altogether. And I think the answer to this question, when we get to it, is going to really explain why central planning on a large scale has not worked to any noteworthy extent.